Welcome to the 2 Cents We See Scary Movies podcast. We're your go-to horror duo, breaking down scary flicks, diving into their twists and turns, and giving you all the commentary you didn't know you needed, or maybe wanted. I'm Talon, your guide to the creepy, the kooky, and the downright terrifying, and with me is my co-host Dan, who's never met a scare he didn't laugh at or critique. Together, we'll take you on a terrifying journey through the world of horror, one scream at a time. This is it, folks, our very first episode. And since it's April 1st, we're kicking off with the 80s classic April Fool's Day. This movie blends horror and comedy with a dash of the absurd, making it the perfect pick for our debut. So let's dive in, talk about the pranks, the scares, and the ending that might leave you scratching your head or laughing. Let's get started. But first, I want to discuss our love of horror and how we got into horror and a little bit about ourselves. So I'll let Dan go ahead and chat about himself for a bit.
All right, so I grew up in a horror hound house.
What?
My dad and a horror hound house.
Horror house, okay.
Yes, that is what my aunts and uncles would call my dad, because we absolutely loved horror movies. Well, he loved horror movies growing up, like all the typical like 50s, 60s like monster movies and stuff like that, and it just kind of spilled over into me. So I've been watching horror since I've been 5 years old. I was watching Evil Dead when it first came out, and I was 2, I think. It just kind of snowballed from there. I kind of got out of horror for a little bit there, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, because there really wasn't much going on that was interesting or new, because when you've been watching horror movies for that long, you kind of seen everything.
And you get a little jaded, I think, sometimes. Like, it's not...
Oh, yeah, right, exactly. And then you just start looking for different things that don't really up the ante, but like you're looking for something different. I love gory horror movies, but after a while, it's like that's too much gore. Like the Saw series. I love the Saw series, but at the same time, it got kind of gory, like for a few of the movies. And I like the stuff that is more like psychological scares, and I think that's what I liked about the first Saw, which we'll probably talk about at some point. But that's what I liked about the first Saw, because it wasn't gory, but people think it was. But I mean, I just absolutely love horror. I just split up my DVDs because I have 2 big racks, and I have almost an entire rack of just horror movies because I'm big on physical media. With technology, you never know if your internet's going to go out or whatever. Right. So I have a whole bunch of stuff.
The zombie apocalypse, we don't have anything.
Exactly, and I have a bunch of movies to prepare for it.
Great.
Even though they're not sponsoring us, but they can if they want. I love watching stuff on Tubi, Pluto TV, like especially Tubi, because there's a lot of stuff on there that is low budget, but has a really good story, and they do something different. So that's kind of like a brief synopsis of where I'm at.
So for me, my foray into horror started at the age of 4, and I remember it, not because my parents had me watching it, but I remember it so vividly. We lived in this house, that ranch-style house, where my bedroom was. You could walk out, and there was this big formal living room we never used, and then there was a little half brick wall, and then there was a doorway, and that went into the den where everybody sat and watched TV. So I crept up there, and I pressed up against the brick wall, and I'm looking at the television, and it's the very end of Carrie, where the hand comes out of the ground. I was like, and I went back to my room quickly but quietly. I didn't get caught. I was fascinated by it. From that point on, I loved horror. I didn't get to continue watching horror, of course. I was only 4. But as soon as I was able to, at an age, like I think about 6 or so, because I used to live in Maine, and I remember on the 3 or 4 channels we had up there, every Saturday they had this creature double feature. You remember that?
Yeah, okay. That's something my dad and I used to watch all the time.
I loved Creature Double Feature. And basically, it was 2 movies back to back. They were always about giant bugs. Like
Godzilla.
Yeah, giant bees, giant ants, giant spiders. And I can totally picture it in my head. And of course, now it would probably look absolutely ridiculous. But then I just loved it. I watched that every Saturday. And then once VCRs were coming out and were big, and I'd get videos. And every time I, would get videos, I'd immediately go to the horror section, picked out whatever horror videos they had. And I usually always picked out the obscure, like bottom shelf, like there's only one of the video.
Right.
And just some weird, obscure movie. I've loved horror. And I did to my kids what your dad did to you, I raised my kids in horror as well. And have I told you my theory about people who love horror movies?
No.
Okay, so
No.
I have a theory that people who love horror movies are hopeless romantics. And I know that sounds crazy, but when you think about the feelings you get when you are watching a horror movie, your physical reaction, your pulse goes up, your heart rate goes up, you get that feeling in your stomach. So if you get that like excited, nervous, somewhat scared feeling, the same is true with love. And when you meet somebody and you get that first, that initial oof that you get with people, the physical reaction's the same. It's just the headspace that's different. And one you're terrified, and the other one you're terrified, but just in a different way.
Well, it kind of makes sense because it might trigger the same parts of your brain.
Right.
But that would make sense because romantic stuff to me is terrifying. Like horror. No, stay away from that. That's dangerous. It's like the whole man and the bear in the woods thing. I'll take the horror movie. I'll take the slasher over the woman who like wants to like move to the farm and live a country life.
Okay, so now that we've discussed ourselves a little bit, let's go ahead and jump into this movie. A little background on the movie. April Fool's Day. Its release year was March of 1986, and they, of course, timed it to come out on April 1st. The filming location was mainly in British Columbia, Canada. The key locations included Dunmora Estate at 8100 McPhail Road, Victoria, British Columbia, which served as the St. John Estate for both the interior and exterior shots. I got that information off IMDb. At the box office, it was produced on a budget of about $5 million, and it grossed approximately $12.9 million in the United States. The film is part of the 1980s trend of slasher movies themed around specific commemorative days, following the success of Halloween, which was in 1978, which was huge, of course. Due to its relatively mild depiction of violence compared to other slasher films of that time, it received frequent airings on late-night television, contributing to its cult following. There's a little bit of a tidbit in terms of life imitating art. Actor Griffin O'Neill, who played Skip, was involved in a real-life boating accident in 1986 that led to the death of Giancarlo Coppola.
Which was Francis Ford Coppola's.
Yeah, interesting. And it was not that long. Like 1986, it was like after they filmed it.
Yeah, it was about a year after.
That's crazy. So the actors in this movie are Deborah Foreman, who plays Buffy St. John. She, when I saw her, I was like, oh, Valley Girl. I don't know if you watched Valley Girl, but I loved Valley Girl when I was a kid. That was the first time I ever saw Nicolas Cage. She was also in a movie called Waxwork. Amy Steele plays Kit Graham. She was in Friday the 13th Part 2. Ken Olant as Rob Ferris. He was in a movie called Summer School, and he was in Leprechaun. Jay Baker as Harvey Hal Edison, and I did not understand at all during the movie why Hal is short for Harvey.
Who knows?
Pick up on it. If I missed it, I don't know.
It's like Richard and Dick. How do those two combine?
Happen? Yeah.
Right.
But he was in a movie called Shag and Crimes of the Heart. Deborah Goodrich as Nikki. She was in Just One of the Guys and Remote Control. Leah Pinsett as Nan Youngblood. She was in The Bad Boy and John and the Missus. Thomas F. Wilson. Of course, I also recognized him. He was Arch Cummings. He was in Back to the Future, all those trilogies. And he played Biff. And he was in Action Jackson. Peyton Roner, I'm not sure how to say it, as Chaz Wyszynski. He was in Just One of the Guys and The Relic. And then Griffin O'Neill as Skip St. John. He was in The Escape Artist and Assault of the Killer Bimbos. I haven't seen.
No.
We might have to watch that. It sounds like it might be a horror comedy. Tom Heaton as Constable Potter and Uncle Frank. He was in The Changeling and The Gray Fox. There were some other actors. Mike Nomad, he was Buck. Lloyd Berry as the ferryman. When I was going through the cast, it had Pat Barlow as Clara, and I'm like, who the fuck is Clara? I don't remember Clara. And it took me forever. And then finally, as I was going back and just editing what I was going to talk about, I remembered in the basement scene, Clara is, I don't know, the housekeeper, the lady that came down and was talking to Muffy for like a second. And I was like, yeah, because I was like, who is Clara? I could not think of who that was. At the beginning of the movie, there's a group of friends. They're all waiting at the dock to catch this ferry to get to the island that Muffy St. John's parents' mansion is on. Parents are out of town. They're all coming together. I honestly can't remember why they're getting together, like what they thought their reason was for getting together. Maybe
I think it just kind of felt like it was just a college summer sort of getaway sort of thing. And And Muffy had, and I have to comment on the 80s names: Muffy, Chaz, Art, Skip. Those names have died and they need to come back. But it was a group of friends who were just kind of going over to their friend's house, Muffy, because she invited them over, for the summer and to just kind of hang out.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of like a summer kickoff party sort of thing.
Yeah, I totally missed it, I guess, if there was any explanation for why they were all getting together. And of course, right at the beginning, Chaz, he's got this camera. And of course, Chaz feels, to me, to be dressed most 80s of all of them.
Yes.
The hair and the propped up collar and the vest on. He had that, definitely had that 80s look down.
Oh, absolutely.
And he was filming everybody. And it's such a funny thing because he's filming them right when it starts off. It's looking through his camera at Nan. He's asking her questions or whatever, and the questions are simple, innocent questions, but of course she's giving these like lewd answers, which is totally 80s humor. I mean, all the 80s movies were just full of sex and innuendo, and
that's the thing. As I was watching, I did remember pretty much all the death scenes.
Yeah,
but all the dialogue and all that other stuff I just completely forgot about. Looking at it through the lens of 2024, just knowing how much all this stuff has evolved, not to use the words that the kids use, but it was very cringe. I'm just like, ooh, like this was okay because it's not today. Even in the most violent, vile horror movie that you can think of, like the stuff that goes on in 80s horror movies, it's like, how did they get away with that?
I know, it's crazy. And to think that I was a kid and I watched all this stuff, I don't think I would let my youngest, he's 13. Now I might let him watch some things, but I'm like,
right.
I just don't know. I was like, I don't. 80s movies, whether they were horror movies or even comedies, they had some raunchy comedies in the 80s.
It was very raunchy.
Yeah.
It is. And don't get me wrong, I'm all about freedom of speech and freedom of expression and everything. It's just like, for myself, I don't think that I would really go that route if I was a filmmaker.
Yeah, and also, when you're talking about remembering this movie, I picked this movie because I remember this movie distinctly as a child, and I loved it as a kid. I loved this movie. As I watched it, I was like, I knew the twist. Like, I remembered the twist, but watching this movie, I don't remember any of it. I was like, of course it's been, like nearly 40 years or so since I watched it, because it came out in 86. I probably didn't watch it until like 87, 88 or whatever.
Same.
So it's been close to 40 years. But I really thought I was in my mind, I had a completely different picture of this movie. And it was nothing like what I watched just, yesterday. Okay, so they're all there. They're meeting at the ferry to go to the island. And her friends include Kit, Rob, Arch, and Skip, who's Muffy's cousin. And I got the feeling that they all knew each other from high school or maybe younger. They're not going to college with Muffy, because Nan shows up and she's Muffy's theater classmate. None of them know her. And Hal, he's in her economics class. None of them know him. Now, of course, you may not know everybody on college campus, but those other four all seem to know each other really well. So I don't know. I kind of got the idea that maybe they were all in high school together or something. But then later on, something comes up and I'm like, wait. So, and we'll get into that when we get there. But
also keep in mind, it's 80s writing.
Right.
So, like, the most perfect obscure strangers end up coming into the group and they're like, oh, hey, we're great friends now. And everything's like, and they're talking to each other like they're like been known each other for 20 years, and they'll only know each other for 5 minutes.
Right. Well, that's like the relationship with Skip and Arch, which I was like questioning some throughout the show because, well, we'll get into it in just a second. In the meantime, over on the island, Muffy is preparing for her guests. So she's down in the basement, and while she's down there, she finds this old Jack-in-the-Box and starts reminiscing about it. As she's sitting there turning the crank for the Jack-in-the-Box she's holding on to, you'll see these flashbacks of her as a child where she's received this maybe as a gift or something. At first I thought
it looks like a gift.
I thought this was a birthday party, but then I thought later, once I got to, writing all my notes out, and I thought, oh, maybe this was just April Fool's Day, because there was just a bunch of adults there. I'm like, why are there a bunch of adults at this kid's birthday party and no kids?
Right, yeah.
What birthday party is this? And I felt like she was a little old to be getting a Jack-in-the-Box. So she's reminiscing, and it's going back and forth between her looking like fondly out this smile on her face as she's turning the crank, and then she's thinking about it, and it goes back to her as a kid. Then she, in real time, stops turning the crank before it pops up. And then it goes through this quick little flash of where she's sitting there with as a kid, and she keeps cranking it, and it pops open, and it's this creepy, scary monster.
Like this creepy demon thing, yeah.
Then we go back to the ferry, and they're all on the ferry now. Everybody gets there, shows up finally. They take off. Skip and Arch start playing this, very unclear to me, knife game. I'm not sure what this knife game is. I think they called it something, but I missed it. But I'm like, what is this knife game? All he seemed to be doing was throwing the knife on the floor of the boat, and Skip was. And then Arch was trying to avoid getting hit by the knife. Like, what was this game?
Maybe it was like an alternate form of jarts. Remember jarts? I love jarts. We didn't play it the way we were supposed to. We'd stand in a circle, throw it up in the air, and run and hope that nobody got hit with it. Totally not the way you're supposed to play it, but that's kind of like what this looked like. It was almost kind of like a jarts sort of thing.
Yeah, right. So they're messing around. Well, then Arch decides he doesn't want to play anymore. He's tired of playing the game, and he hands the knife back to Skip in kind of an abrupt manner. Then Skip yells something at him and throws the knife at him, which is super safe.
Yeah, because they kind of got into like a little bit of an argument.
Right. Arch luckily just kind of catches the knife without getting hurt, and then throws it back at Skip, and it goes right in Skip's stomach. And then Skip falls off the ferry, and so then everybody's flipping out. They jump in to get Skip, and they're all looking around. Well, not all of them, but it's just Rob and Buck, the deckhand. So they're in the water looking for Skip. Everyone's screaming and frantic. They go down the water a couple times. They can't find him. Finally, over to the side, you see Skip pop up, and he's got the knife. He's like, "You guys looking for this?" He and Arch start laughing because it's April Fool's.
And then Nan gives Chaz crap for not jumping in, and he's like, "What? I took my coat off." It's like, yeah, that's gonna help.
Took it off, hoping that they can find it before he has to get fully in the water.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So then Rob gets out, and the captain of the ferry boat asks Buck if he wants to, he's gonna go help him out. And he's like, "Oh no, I'll just stay down here to tie up the boat and to the dock," which is ridiculous. Go ahead.
Before we go too far, there was a scene before that where Chaz was recording everybody, and he was doing the whole stupid gag of, "Oh, your fly's unzipped," And was it Hal? I think it was Hal who was sitting there, and his fly happened to be unzipped. Right. And I don't know if you noticed this, but when he zipped up his zipper, I don't know what the sound guy was doing, but that zipper was so friggin' loud compared to everything else that was going on that boat. It's like, I've never heard a zipper go that hard and that loud before.
That was Rob. And
Rob, yeah.
Rob and Kit were sitting there, and he wouldn't look at it at first, but then, it was unzipped, and it was
I mean, that caught me so hard, like in that whole movie. That's all I kept on thinking about through the whole thing. Like, why was that zipper so loud?
Buck decides to stay in the water to try to hook the boat to the dock using the rope as a lasso almost, and it's just got the tiny little rounded tied off end to try to get it up onto the dock to tie off the boat. And I'm like, why the fuck would he want to stay water for this, because it's so
right.
And, it was, and he just kept doing it and couldn't get it. And of course,
and the boat's getting closer and closer.
And then the captain notices, and he starts yelling, which of course it's too late. And then the boat gets him stuck in between, or runs up against him, and he goes under the water. And then everybody's like freaking out, and they run over to him, and he pops up, and his face is all crazy, and his eyes popped out, and his face is a mess, and they're all screaming and freaking out. Also, I don't know if you noticed this, but when the ferry first got to where they were picking up the people, there was a shot of just the ferry coming in and it hitting the dock there. And I thought to myself, oh, this must be foreshadowing, because it was such an obvious shot.
Right. Yeah.
Given, of course, that I don't remember anything about the movie, so it was foreshadowing.
I did not pick up on that, but this movie does have some foreshadowing throughout.
Oh yeah, definitely. They pull him out of the water, and it just so happened, miraculously, a police officer is in a little speedboat right where they are.
Right.
Like, oh. So
what a coincidence.
Yeah, it's amazing. So he comes rushing over, and what's going on? And it's funny. This part I thought was funny because, of course, Buck is flailing around and he's screaming, and they're trying to hold on to him as they're trying to get him in the boat. And the captain has him, and the captain just throws him in the boat, like just threw him down there, like didn't gently.
Yep.
The guy just got his face smashed, and you basically threw him head first into the speedboat. So then the police officer gets out onto the ferry, and the captain jumps into the speedboat and flies off, going to the mainland. So then Muffy ends up showing, there's all this commotion, and then Muffy comes down, and she's like, what's going on? And then the police officer's like, well, you need to talk to your friends, and they're practical joking, and she's like, oh, okay. And then he asks her about her dad's boats, and if he can use one of his boats to get back to the mainland. And then she tells him, for no reason at all, that all the keys are up at the house. But there is a set hidden under the cushions of the boat. Why didn't you just tell him that? Why did you have to tell him that there are keys up at the house? Which, of course, is somewhat foreshadowing.
And it could have been setting up something for her friends, because the way the movie ends up going, it could have been just to throw them off the track.
Yeah. So my thought here was, why don't you just take the ferry back? And I know the ferry's not as fast, but there's a whole ferry. You could have just taken this ferry back. And I said this to myself a lot during this movie. Just get on the ferry. Everybody's waiting around for getting saved. You can just take the damn ferry.
Right.
So then they all go back up to the house. And there's a brief scene where Muffy, Kit, and Nan are in the kitchen preparing stuff for dinner. And I thought it was kind of funny. It was just kind of a throwback that gave me a bit of a flashback, I guess, of the days when magazines had quizzes in them.
Yep.
And all of them did, especially all the girl magazine. And they were discussing all these different questions from this magazine.
Well, a little tidbit about that scene is it really wasn't originally in the script. What ended up happening was they had the three girls just kind of like hanging out outside of the movie, just trying to get to know each other. Oh. And one of them had a Cosmopolitan magazine, and they were reading off the questions, and the director liked it so much that they wanted to recreate the scene, and he gave them a whole different magazine with a whole different set of questions and just said, improv this. And that's how that scene got in there. And I got that from IMDb.
Oh, nice. Okay, cool. Well, that's a cool little tidbit. So then we go to the dinner scene, and everybody goes in to sit down. Of course, throughout the night, because it's April Fool's, there's all these little pranks going on. There's whoopee cushions and a trick chair. But during this whole dinner scene, like, they're talking about different things, and they give a big toast. No one mentions or notices that Skip isn't around. Skip was outside this whole time. From the time basically they got there, even through the dinner scene, and then of course next into the bedroom scene. Skip's not there. He's outside, guilt-ridden over this knife prank that went badly, and he's drinking quite heavily. Like, he's got this hidden stash of liquor outside. I don't know, but he's drinking, because it was daylight at one point and he was drinking, and then it got dark and he was still drinking, but nobody noticed he was gone. So then there's this weird little scene where Skip leaves the house and starts walking down to the docks, and he has a knife with him, and he stops to cut off a leaf off a bush or something, and I don't know.
As one would do.
Yeah. Maybe I'm crazy for questioning it.
Right. I mean, I do it all the time. So I mean,
drunk, not drunk. You killed somebody, you didn't kill somebody. It doesn't matter.
Right. You get a leaf. It makes everything better.
I don't know if he smelled it or he licked it or he ate it, but he had it like cupped in his hands and he had it up to his mouth. And I'm like, what is he doing with this freaking leaf? It was such a weird little part.
Right.
I don't know what the heck that was for. So maybe it was ad-libbed. I don't know. So then or maybe just to show just how drunk he is. I don't know. So
maybe.
He walks down the docks and he goes to the boathouse. So he goes to the boathouse and it's dark, of course. And he walks over to this window, I guess just purposefully for the shot, because that's the only light coming into this boathouse. And he hears this noise and he has his knife, and then this cat springs out at him, which we never see that cat again, by the way. No. And it's like, and it jumps at him, and then he puts his knife down into the windowsill and he pulls his lighter out, and as soon as he does that, someone grabs him on his shoulders and pulls him back, and we don't see him alive again.
But I'd also like to say, at dinner, nobody noticed that Skip was gone. Nobody was also talking about Buck. I'm sorry, but if something traumatic happened like that and I witnessed it, I think it would be kind of part of the conversation. Right.
Well, apparently Skip was the only one bothered by what happened to Buck. Everybody else didn't seem to care. And I mean, maybe that was the way of the 80s.
Right.
So then we move back to the house and dinner's over and they all go to bed, which surprised me a little because it's their first night together after whatever amount of time it's been. They aren't going to stay up and party for a while. I thought that was odd. But they all decided they were going to go to bed, and they each had their bedrooms, which were already picked out for them. In each bedroom, there was something going on in some form of a prank or just weird things. For
Yeah,
instance,
just weird.
yeah. So, for instance, Nan, she's taking a shower. She hears a baby crying. She gets out of the shower, goes in the bedroom. The sound's coming from an armoire. She opens it up. There's a tape recorder with this crying baby. She pulls it out. She looks very bothered and upset about this crying baby soundtrack. Arch, he's in his room. The door handle comes off, but yet somehow he gets out of that room later. He goes to the bathroom. He opens the medicine cabinet, and there's a bunch of drug paraphernalia in there. Hal, and these are the two that I thought were weird, because was Arch in the drug paraphernalia, and then Hal, he opens a door, and there's a newspaper clipping taped to it about a fiery car crash where 3 people died. And then he goes and opens the drawer of a dresser, and there's 2 more articles about the same thing. And then Chaz walks in and was like, oh, oops, wrong room. But when he walked in, Hal quickly closed it up and was a little nervous and anxious about it.
Right.
They never really they don't address the drug paraphernalia, because with the Nan thing, we find out later on there is some significance to that story. But especially the fiery car crash, I thought that was going to come up. I mean, it does come up briefly, but it doesn't come up in the way that I thought it was going to come up later. Like it was going to play a part in what was going on at the house. Nothing. Like no.
Well, maybe whatsoever. Who knows? Maybe there was like plot points that just wasn't explored because maybe they ran out of time or they didn't have the scene written or whatever.
Yeah, maybe.
Because it did feel like that there was more to those things, that maybe Arch maybe had a drug issue and maybe Hal was involved with that car crash. And don't forget, Nikki finds the S&M gear.
She has the S&M gear, and she gets sprayed with water because the water faucet's messed up so that it sprays directly into her face. And then Rob and Kit, now their room was more just goofy stuff. They had the picture on the wall that had the eyes cut out, but there were eyes behind it that were moving. They took it off, and there was this cat clock, that classic kind of cat clock where the tail moves and the eyes move when it ticks. And then he turns the light off by the bed. It turns on a light across the room, and then he turns that one off, and it turns the overhead light on and back and forth. Theirs was more like just kind of jokey than anything else.
Right.
Compared to the other ones that seem to have some, you would think they'd have some significance, but they really ended up not having much significance at all. So everybody finally goes to bed after some, you see all this stuff going on in different bedrooms. Then the next morning, everybody's up. They go outside. A bunch of them are kicking around a soccer ball. When Arch comes outside, he does mention, hey, has anybody seen Skip? Or I haven't seen Skip since last night, or something along those lines. Briefly, Skip is mentioned there.
It only took them, 18, 19 hours to realize that he wasn't there?
Something like that. So they're all kind of playing soccer. Nan is sitting up on the porch of the house, and she's studying, but you could tell she still looks like she's a little irritated or upset about the night before. She does notice Muffy across the yard. There's some bushes in between where the kids are playing soccer, and then you see Muffy, and she's walking past a shed, and she's got this basket, and you can tell that Muffy looks weird at this point. Like her hair's weird. So Nan sees her, and Nan jumps up and runs to go talk to her, and when she gets there, Muffy's gone. Rob and Kit, they decide to go down to the water, and Rob wants to go swimming. Kit apparently does not, just Rob. And he gets out of the water. They're talking about some stuff that was talked about the night before dinner. But then they decide to go in the boathouse for some sex and good old sexy time in the boathouse.
Yeah, and as one would do, Rob wanted to go swimming after Buck is presumed dead, Skip is missing. Those are the things that you do when...
Those are the important things in life in the 80s.
Right, exactly.
So Rob and Kit go into the boathouse. They get all flirty or whatever. She lays down this blanket or towel, and she lays down on her back, and then Rob's above her. And the floor of the boathouse has wooden planks that have a pretty decent amount of space in between them. And she happens to look over, and when she looks over, she sees a dead Skip floating by underneath the boathouse. I think he might have been on something. Maybe he was on a boat. He looked like he was on something.
It was like some sort of plank or something.
Yeah.
Like a floating plank.
So she screams. They jump up. They run up to the house where everybody is, and everybody else is on the porch now. And Rob's like, have you seen Skip? Where's Skip? And then they explain, and then Kit's like, I just saw him. I swear I saw him. He was dead. He was floating out of the boathouse. They all run down towards the boathouse, but don't actually go to the boathouse because Rob and Chaz and Arch all stand up on this little area a little bit away from the boathouse talking about having to go find Skip. So they decide to split up and do this Scooby Gang thing. And Arch, he's all like, big badass, and he grabs some pole or whatever. He's like, no one's going to get me. And he takes off to go to the woods. I don't know what they're looking for because she just saw him right there at the boathouse. Why are they going to the woods? I don't know. Maybe they figured it wasn't him and that maybe it was some other dead body. So let's go find Skip and hope he's alive. I guess that's what it was.
You know, or they were trying to find the killer, quote unquote, not knowing what's going on.
Possibly.
It's one of those great 80s writing moments.
It could be anything. So they go on and split up. Then you have a scene here, and I think this is where this scene is. Nan confronts Muffy in the hallway in the house. So Muffy had gone back in with her basket and had some vegetables or whatever. Here you're seeing her close up. She looks really, really different than she did when we first saw her. Her hair is almost straightened out, but it's not really straight. It's kind of frizzy, and she's dressed really modestly. It was just weird looking. You could tell she just was different. She walks out of there. Nan confronts her about the tape. How'd she know about the baby? Didn't really say why it was bothering her, but you kind of got the idea. And Muffy was just kind of, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
She almost had this very monotone, but there was that naivete to her but she was almost like she was in a trance sort of thing.
Yeah, it was almost like she was high, but there was no indication of her being on drugs.
Except what was in Arch's bathroom. Maybe.
Right. Right. No, that's true. That's true.
While they're talking, Hal down the hall and kind of halfway up the staircase, but he overhears this argument going on where Nan's upset with Muffy, which plate comes in a little bit later. Muffy, of course, here again, she's kind of distracted and indifferent. Doesn't really seem too bothered or worried about Nan being upset. So then we go back to Arch. Now this scene, there were some things on this scene that kind of cracked me up a little bit. So Arch is out into the woods. He's looking for Skip. He hears a noise and of course naturally decides to walk towards that noise. So when he walks over, there's this kind of open area in the woods and there's this huge snake and it's not laying in the grass where it's hidden. It's up in the air, semi-coiled, ready to pounce.
Right there.
Right there. He walks past this snake at least 3 or 4 times in the exact same spot right beside the snake. And he was real close to it. Doesn't see the snake. And then on his last pass, somehow he managed to miss this the first 3 or 4 times he walked by. But there was a rope snare that his foot got caught in, and it pulled him up, and he was hanging upside down from his foot on this rope snare from a tree. And then the snake then decides to try to attack him. Right. Then you see these feet walk. All you can see is like from like maybe the shin down, come over, kick the snake away, and then Arch is looking up and is kind of terrified, and then that's the end of that scene, and it goes right into the next scene.
Now, I do have to say, if I'm in the woods and I hear a noise, I am not walking towards it. I have seen too many horror movies to say, if I hear a noise, I'm going the other way, and if someone's with me and you're in the way, you're bait. You are bait. Now, don't get me wrong. I haven't ran since 1995, but I'm going to walk really fast to get out of there, and I'm going to use you as bait.
See, for me, it kills me. I have to know what the hell that noise is. It would drive me crazy if I didn't know. So I would be, you could walk fast the other way. I'll go and find out what it is and hopefully distract whatever it is that's coming. Okay.
There we go.
Did you notice in this scene, because whenever they would show the snake, of course, you're seeing Arch walk by, but you only see the lower half of his legs because they have a close-up every time he walks by this snake. But did you happen to notice that whatever they had this snake set up on, props-wise, there was obviously something, the floor, like they weren't really outside with ground, or they were and they put some fake ground. But when he would take steps in that spot, the ground would give way really distinctly. It would go down and pop back up.
Like it was a piece of a plank or something.
Yeah, like there was something there. So they had some mechanism for the snake, I guess, underneath it. But I noticed that right away. I was like, oh, funny.
I have to be honest, that's one of the things I love about 80s type horror movies. The little mistakes here and there, it just brings something to them. I read yesterday talking about horror movies and just how low budget they tend to be and how not serious they're taken. But at the same time, they're one of the ones that does the most innovation when it comes to movies.
Right, yeah.
A lot of it has to do with those little mistakes and the little things that they had to do to get around certain things.
Yeah.
You know.
That makes total sense. Because back in the day, like, they didn't have all this CGI and all this stuff that they
No.
could just put right in there. They had to come up with some shit
Absolutely.
to figure out how they're going to, do things. There was a lot of ingenuity and innovation going on back in the day. Then the scene goes to where Kit and Nikki are on the porch waiting for the guys to come back. Rob comes in from one side and Chaz comes in from the other. One of them says, "Did you find Skip?" And the other one's like, "I didn't see anybody." And then somebody asks, "Well, where's Arch?" And then they're like, "I don't know. Nobody knows where Arch is." Now they have 2 people missing. So now their girls are frantic. Kit's like, "I'm done. I've had enough. I'm going to call the police." They start to walk in the house. And as they're walking in the house, Muffy comes out looking all weird. And she's got a vase of flowers. And she doesn't seem phased at all that everybody's freaking out. She's like, just her doped up whatever. Right. Kit says she's going to call the police. She mentions that, which again is one of those lines like, I realize the setup now, of course, but it's almost so, I don't know if it's obvious or unnecessary. I don't know which one to pick. But she said, "Oh, the constable's office is at his home." Okay, thanks. Like,
right.
do they have his home number? I mean, do they know it? Is that why she's telling him this?
Right. Can we have the address?
Why are you telling me this? And then she offers everyone tea. And then everybody's like, what? Tea is true. Like, huh? No.
Well, I mean, maybe Muffy was British and it was just tea time.
True. That's true. They all go in the house. You see Rob trying to call. And it's a good old rotary phone, too. Did you notice that?
Yes.
It's like, oh, rotary phone. So he's dialing, waiting. No answer. Hangs up. Picks it up again, dials, no answer. Then you see Muffy in the kitchen. Well, she walks into the kitchen with like 5 boxes of tea, almost dropping them. And then Kit walks in and she offers to help her with the tea. So Kit grabs a kettle, goes to the sink to fill the kettle with water, and the water starts spurting out and it's all dirty and mucky and gross. Muffy says, "Oh, that's probably the water main that happens sometimes." And Kit's like, "What? Now we have no water?" And she's like, "No, well, we can and somebody mentions, "Well, we still have a well." So then at that point, Nikki and Hal are in the kitchen, and Nikki and Hal offer to go to the well to get water. So this is also a fun little scene. So they go to, oh, hold on, I gotta back up for a second. There is a brief little scene with Nan, where Nan, who is still upset about the conversation with Muffy and the cassette tape, and she goes out to this kind of Japanese garden, sort of. She really gets pissed off at the tree and rips off its flowers and crumbles them. And then she goes and sits down on this bench, and all of a sudden the wind just whips up like a hurricane and is blowing everywhere. Like trees are and her hair and her clothes are just blowing. And then that's it. That's all. That's the last scene with Nan before
she pissed the tree off.
I guess so. It was vengeance. It was, maybe this is what inspired M. Night Shyamalan. What was that movie he did? Where the trees get their revenge and had, shoot.
I don't know. I've only liked 2 of his movies. Everything else I can't stand.
But the trees were all decided to poison everybody basically and kill everyone. Anyway, there's the well scene. So Hal and Nikki go to fetch water and they get to this well. It doesn't look like a very big well, at least not from the top. And of course it's the typical wooden bucket, little, like, I don't know what they're going to do with this one little bucket of water tied to a rope that you would, let down into the well. Hal is coming on to Nikki. So there's this chit chat or whatever.
Yeah, I believe that's the part where he ends up saying, "I'd really like to plow your field."
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that was a Golden Globe moment right there. Yeah, talking about being a farm boy and
she didn't really turn him down though.
Nope, she didn't. Maybe I should try that sometime.
Yeah.
that might work.
So he's talking to her and gets this bucket that's tied to a rope. I mean, I'm pretty sure it was tied to it, but somehow fumbles around with it and drops it into the well, no longer tied to the rope. Don't know how that happened. Again, 80s magic. Then Nan, who has this giant flashlight, he's like, "Can you shine the flashlight down?" So she's just sitting there. So she just holds the flashlight over her head. And of course, she drops the flashlight in the well. So now they're like, well, shit. So she gets up, she's looking down into the well, and she notices there's these rungs. She's like, "Oh, there's this little ladder that goes all the way down there. I'll just go down and get it." And he's first like, "Oh, no." She's like, "Oh, no problem." So she goes down, and as she's going down, one of the rungs gives loose. She falls back into the water. And when she comes up, you see two heads bobbing around in the water with her, one being Skip and one being Arch. And she starts screaming and going crazy. So then Hal, instead of immediately going down to help her, he starts yelling for Rob, for Chaz, or anybody come and help me, please. This is very much like the Chaz, I took my jacket off moment almost.
Right.
Yeah. So finally, he's like, okay, fine, I'll come down and get you. Well, she's already trying to make her way back up. And again, another rung breaks. She falls back in the water. And this time, when she comes up, she's holding an entire body. I'm like, how big is this well? This well wasn't that big at the top. I don't know where did this well come from, this huge well? So then she starts screaming even more. And this body is Nan. How Nan got there, I don't know if the wind whipped up so much.
They blew her into the well.
Across the yard and down the holler and into the well. I don't know. I was like, how the fuck did she get there? And at first, when I first saw it, I was like, who is this person? I didn't realize Nan had died. Was there just another body just happens to be there? Like, that's weird. But nope, it's Nan. So he finally gets down close enough to grab her hand, although they made it look like his hand was going to come loose and he was going to lose grip, but he didn't, because it goes right to the next scene where they're back at the house. Nikki is sitting down, but all splayed out. Her upper body's on the table and she's all upset, and Kit's trying to make her feel better and console her. It's Rob, Chaz, Nikki, Kit, and Hal. So they're in there trying to console Nikki, and then Muffy walks in, and Hal demands weapons, wants some guns. She's like, there's no guns in the house. The phone rings. So it's the constable calling back. I guess he somehow found out they were trying to call him, or maybe he was calling just to give them an update on Buck, and it just so happened he didn't realize that they had been trying to get a hold of him. I don't know. So Rob goes, answers the phone, talks to him, starts explaining what's going on there at the house. Then they show this shot of the constable at the hospital, and he's like, it can't be Buck. I'm here at the hospital with him. So now Rob is like, what could be going, like this look, like what could be going on? And then there's a little more conversation, and you hear Rob say Muffy, and then Rob hangs up the phone after he's assured that it's not Buck. Then of course the constable gives them those instructions, and then they all go around locking all the doors and windows. I was surprised that they split up here, because they know this crazy shit's going on, but they all split up to go do this. Kit goes into this study, or somebody's office. I'm guessing maybe the dad's office, closing the windows and stuff, and she sees this picture on the desk, and it's two little kids. Now, when I saw it, I thought it was probably Muffy and her brother, because again, I don't remember the movie at all. I don't know what your thoughts were when she saw the picture, but I thought that it was because they had mentioned she had a brother earlier on, but I think they said died, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they did. Only because I did remember how the movie ended and everything, so that part I kind of knew. Yeah. But I could see how someone who hasn't seen it or doesn't remember how part of it went, that could be the situation, that it would be her brother.
Right. So she's looking at this picture. Muffy walks in, and Muffy says this kind of oddly cryptic thing about people trying to get to the island, and they can't necessarily always get to the island quickly because of the tides, and then sometimes they can't get there at all. And she says it in this kind of creepy little way. And she's dressed, the way she was dressed in this scene, she has this big oversized brown cardigan on, and then she's got this shirt underneath it with this huge collar, and then she said these kind of dopey shoes, but she kind of looks like she's dressed like a little kid almost. Like she's wearing adult clothes on a little kid body, the way they were so big on her. And it kind of had this little kid look to me.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I didn't think about that in the moment, but yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. They leave the room. Kit goes back into the other room with everybody else. They're sitting there on the couch discussing the events of the day, and this is where the fiery car crash newspaper articles do come, because they start talking about all the weird stuff in the bedroom. Chaz brings up how Nikki's room had a bunch of S&M stuff in it. Also brings up that Hal's room had the fiery car crash newspaper clippings, which I don't know how he saw those. They were inside the drawer, so I don't know how Chaz could have seen them. But he made a comment about how Hal was really weird about it and he closed it up really quickly. So then I thought, oh, maybe they're going to address this. Nope, not really.
Yeah, it's just there. It's just there.
It's just a thing. So they're all talking about it. Kit was talking about how weird Muffy has been acting, and Nikki was like, yeah, she's been acting weird all day. How have you not noticed? She points out her odd dress and her behavior. And then Hal mentions the argument with Muffy and Nan. As the group is talking about all these things, they're kind of making it sound like they think that Muffy is doing this on purpose. So then Kit gets upset about it. She's like, she's our friend. How can you accuse her? And then Muffy walks in the room, so everybody gets quiet. She announces that she's going to go to her room. Rob says, no, we should probably stay together. The constable said we should all stay together. And she's like, this is my house. I'm going to my room. So then Nikki and Chaz also decide to go to their room. Then Rob decides he wants to go to the attic because, yay, fun.
Yeah.
Attic when people are dying and it's creepy. Attics and basements, that's the best places to be. Creepy shit's happening.
Yeah, I mean, you have limited exits and entrances, so the killer can't come in wherever. I mean, that's always a safe thing.
And you can't get out.
Right.
Then we have the scene where Nikki and Chaz are in the bedroom. Nikki's kind of freaking out and she's ready to get out of there. So she starts packing all their shit to leave. Chaz is trying to calm her down. He jokingly pulls out one of the bondage gear hats, the leather hat.
Yeah, the face mask thing.
And he's standing there and he's acting goofy and she's not impressed. Then he takes that one off and he puts another one on that covers his whole face. She's like, I'm not having it. And she pushes him down. He falls on the bed. She leaves the room and then he's still laying there on the bed. This mask he has on has no eye holes and no mouth hole. So he can't see that she's not there. He's still there trying to talking to her, saying, hey, baby, come on, come and get it. Then you see Nikki coming back down the hall with some more clothes. She opens the door. Chaz is still laying on the bed, but he's quiet. And he's just laying there. And he's kind of got his hands cupped together over his private parts area. So she thinks he's trying to be funny and trying to be sexy or whatever. She sits down on the bed and she's just talking away to him and she's putting her shoes on, talking, and there's no response from him. Finally, she's tired of the fact that he's laying there and that his hands are where they are. So she stands up, she turns around and she swipes his hands away and there's a big bloody spot where his dick used to be. I don't know what happened to it. You kind of get an idea, I suppose.
And see, as a kid, especially being a male child, I always thought if that was to happen to me, that was an instant death sentence.
Right.
I mean, socially, yes, but not so much physically. I mean, there was nothing else that harmed him. And as we know from John Wayne Bobbitt, you can survive that.
And there wasn't that much blood.
No, there wasn't. I mean,
hardly any blood, actually.
So, I mean, I don't understand how he died in that respect.
It was the wind, like Nick.
It could have been the wind.
Mysterious.
Yep, the wind.
Know.
Right.
So
I mean, that damn tree.
It's the trees. They're all out to get them. Now, of course, she sees this. She doesn't scream or anything, but she just has that look of shock and fear on her face. You can see behind her, and the door, which was open, starts to close, and then it shows a shot of the feet, which are the same feet and the same boots that we saw when Arch was killed. So you see these feet, they're approaching her. She must sense or hear there's somebody behind her. She turns around, and she has this look of shock on her face. That cuts out. You don't see what happens, to her there. The next scene cuts to Rob and Kit up in the attic. So they're up in the attic. They're looking around. It's dark. Rob goes over to the window, can't see the boat, says that maybe the police officer doesn't have a light on his boat. I'm sure that doesn't happen often, but okay. Kit is looking around and she notices some dolls and notices how weird these dolls are. So she calls Rob over and she's like, look, the dolls. And they notice that the dolls basically represent everyone from the friend group. Some of them even showing their fates. There was a bowl of water and it had a doll in that was to represent Nan. And there were two little doll heads floating in it. And then you had this white sheet with Nikki and Chaz. And that was all bloody. Then they are staring at it and they're a little freaked out. Haven't quite totally processed it, and then all of a sudden you hear this loud noise. It's the flare going off, and I can't remember if I said this or not, but the constable did say that when he gets to the dock, he was going to shoot off a flare. So that's what they were waiting for. I think I forgot that part. Anyway, so the flare goes off. You see the light. They're like, okay, let's get out of here and go down to the docks so we can get the hell off this island, even though there's been a ferry there the whole time. What? Although you never never see the fairy again, but it had to be there. I also don't understand. Where could it have gone?
Well, because they never said it went anywhere because the ferryman took the policeman's boat to bring Buck to shore.
Right. Like, did somebody come back at some point and get the fairy? And I don't know. I was like, just take the fairy the whole damn movie. So when they came out from the attic, Kit and Rob wanted to find Nikki, Chaz, and Hal. She was like, Nikki's in her room. She's not answering. The door is locked. I can't get it open. Rob turns the doorknob. It opens up instantly. And then all you see is a bunch of blood dripping off the sheets and onto the floor. So you know they're dead. And then she's like, well, what about Muffy? And he's like, I don't care about Muffy. She's like, she's our friend. She goes to Muffy's room, tries to open the door. She's having a hard time getting it open, which I don't understand why exactly. I think there might have been something in front of the door, but Hal hanging from the ceiling from a rope, he should have been easy to move. He should have just swung. But she's having a hard time opening the door. Rob comes and helps her. They open it and they see Hal hanging from the rope. Rob and Kit, of course, they run out of the house. They go down to the dock and they see the boat, but they don't see the constable. At first, Rob wants to go into the boathouse and Kit's like, don't go to the boathouse, you fucking nut. Like,
Skip's in there.
Yeah. We don't want to go in there. They realize that they need to get on this boat and try to get the fuck out of there. And at first they were going to shoot off another flare. I guess maybe to let the constable know that they're at the boat, I guess. And then they decide they need to look for the keys. So while Rob's looking for the flare or a flashlight, he ends up with a flashlight. She finds a letter. She opens the letter and it basically just talks about how it's a letter from a mental institution to Constable Potter stating that they had a patient at the hospital who'd been there for 3 years. They have escaped. They believe that Miss St. John is back at home in his jurisdiction. Then Kit's like, well, this can't be Muffy. Muffy's been at Vassar for 3 years. And then they're like, what? So then they're like, well, we got to get the keys and get out of here. So Rob, of course, remembers that there is an extra set of keys up at the house. So they have to go back up to the house. She doesn't want to go, but he convinces her that they have to. So they stealthily walk back up to the house. They're hiding behind some bushes. And she makes the comment, which I thought was silly, all the doors are locked. I was like, well, no shit, they're all locked. You guys just locked all the doors when you were inside just a little while ago. Why would you think they'd all be open? And how does she know? Like, I don't know. But anyway, so then, of course, just so happens, the basement window is open. Which, I forgot to say this earlier, during the beginning scene where we first see Muffy down in the basement with the Jack-in-the-Box, she props open the basement window.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah. Rob, of course, sees this window that's propped open. He's like, this is how we're going to go in. They go over, they crawl through this basement window. They get inside. Of course, it's basically pitch black in there. But she happens to see a trail of blood. And the trail of blood leads to this wood furnace that they open up and they're like, oh, it's Muffy's clothes. Well, I don't know how they knew that. I mean, maybe it's that big fucking ugly sweater. I don't know why there's a blood trail going to the wood furnace because it's just clothes. I mean, I don't know why there's a blood trail. So then somehow Kit also happens to see across the basement in the dark lines on the wall with words beside them. So they go over to that and you can see where it's like where you go and you chart your kid's height as they grow. And so the lines there and it's Muffy and Buffy. And then it clicks. Kit figures it out. She realizes that Muffy has a twin sister, Buffy, that's what's going on. So she's trying to explain to Rob that it's not Muffy that's been here this whole time. It's Buffy. And Buffy... scary twist. And this is where I get a little confused. And that's why, like I was talking about before, that I thought they had like maybe grown up together or were in high school together or somehow knew each other. Because I'm like, how did they not know she had a twin sister? Like,
right.
How did I know this? It's like, this doesn't make any sense. Anyway, so she's explaining, so it was Buffy, and she broke out of the mental institute, and that it wasn't Muffy that was there. So then she's telling this to Rob, and Rob's like, doesn't look like he's paying attention because he's staring at something with this look of, oh my God, what is that doing here? And so she looks, and it's that picture, the portrait that was in their bedroom that had the eyes cut out.
Yeah.
But instead of having the big cat eyes behind it, it has human eyes behind it. Rob reaches over to grab something to use as a weapon and tells Kit to go take the picture down. So she takes the picture down, and you see Muffy's head, and it tumbles out and into Kit's hands. They're screaming and freaking out. They run upstairs, and when they get upstairs, they're now like, we have got to find these keys, because this is where the keys are. The keys are somewhere in the kitchen. Now we have...
I mean, personally, I think I would have tried to find the keys a lot sooner than this, but...
Right, right. Well,
everybody has their breaking point.
They're upstairs, they're in the kitchen, they're frantically going through all these cabinets and drawers and everything. And then you see Buffy, who is outside the kitchen door, and she's trying to get in. The door is locked because, they locked all the doors and stuff. And so the door is locked, and she sticks her huge machete in between the door and the door frame, and she's trying to use like a credit card where you use it to slip up and unlock the door. So she's doing that. Yeah. They're frantically running around. Rob sees this other door. He opens it up. He sees the keys hanging there, and it's kind of like a pantry, I guess.
Yeah.
He steps all the way into the pantry to get the keys. And he's like, oh, kid, I found them. And about that time, Buffy gets the door open. And I guess the movement of air from her opening the door to the outside caused the door to the pantry to slam shut and lock. Because now Rob is trapped.
Remember how windy it was?
Oh, yes. Gosh, it's the wind. Wind is the real bad guy in this movie.
The tree in the back. Yes. Yep. I think it's kind of like it's a Scream ending. It's the tree and the wind.
So the door slams. He's locked in there. Can't get out. He's screaming. There's Buffy, and she's got the knife, and she's staring down Kit. So Kit runs into the dining room. Buffy follows her. Kit is running around the dining room, looks for the window, which is of course locked because they locked all the fucking doors and windows before. So that's locked. She's running around the dining room table, and everywhere she goes, she's getting cut off by Buffy, who then jumps up on the dining room table like a savage animal. So she's now basically got Kit cornered and pushed up against the sliding doors that go into this other sitting room area.
Yeah, kind of like a den or something, yeah.
Yeah. Buffy's almost right there with the knife. She raises the knife up real high, pushes the doors open, but she's back too. But behind her with her hands, she pushes the doors open, walks into that room, which all the lights are on in that room. So then Buffy follows her in there slightly. Kit turns around, and when she turns around, big reveal, everybody that died is sitting in that room. But the funny thing is, they're all sitting there nonchalantly. They're not looking at them. All this screaming and carrying on's going on. And you've got Chaz building a house of cards. Nikki is sitting beside him looking at a magazine. Skip and Arch are chit-chatting over by the fireplace, but they're doing it very quietly. Hal's drinking a shot of whiskey or something. The fairy guy's there. Constable Potter's there. He's reading a book. Nan is doing something. Everybody's there, but no one's paying attention to the fact that they just ran into this room screaming and she's got a knife. It's just like, you can see on her face, she's got, what the fuck? What's going on? She's super confused. She's still scared though. You can still see she's afraid. She doesn't understand what's going on. Buffy/Muffy takes the big knife and plunges it into her own hand, to show that it's retractable. Everybody, of course, starts laughing because Kit's like, what? And they're all laughing, and then April Fools.
All the while, Kit is like underneath like some severe PTSD, ready to have a nervous breakdown. Everybody's like, oh, happy fools.
And then, all this time, Rob is still back in the pantry. And he's beating on the door, yelling and screaming, telling Kit to run, and I love you, babe, I love you. And he's screaming at her. Has no idea that any of this is going on, of course. Then all of a sudden, he's like, I love you, babe. And then he gets his hand on his shoulder. And he jumps back, and it's Buck. And he's like, I love you too, babe. Rob just instinctively punches him in the face.
Yep.
I can't remember what came first. If Buck peeled off his prosthetic piece that he had on his face with the bulging eye and everything and stuck it to Rob's face, or if he pulled Rob in and looked like he was going to bite his neck but kissed his neck. But those two things happened.
He reached in, kissed him on the neck, then pulled away, peeled it off, and then slapped it on his face.
Okay. All right. So that...
And I must say that is one hell of a prosthetic to be able to put it on in the water and have it stay on.
Yeah, that was amazing. Underwater, he got that thing on there.
Right.
Crazy.
In like 2 seconds.
Rob is still screaming and freaking out. Buck unlocks the door, lets Rob out. He falls onto the floor in the kitchen, jumps up, starts running through the dining room and into the room where everybody is. And he's
flailing around.
And he's just screaming. And then he sees everybody. And then they all start laughing at him, except for Kit, because he's got the prosthetic and he's freaked out.
Right.
Everybody chills a little bit, and we have the scene where she starts to explain what's going on. Muffy explains that the weekend was a trial run for her murder mystery business idea for the mansion, because when she turns 21, she's going to inherit it, but her father doesn't think she's going to be able to afford the upkeep of the house, with the house being old, the taxes, and all that stuff. So she decides that she's going to have this murder mystery inn, which at that time, murder mystery stuff like that is kind of big now. You got all the escape rooms and shit.
Right.
This was really way before its time, that concept.
It was.
So she's talking about all that. She goes into quite a bit of explanation for it that seemed like a lot. But she also revealed that she does not have a twin sister named Buffy, but her cousin, Skip, is not actually her cousin, but it's her twin brother. And that Buck is a makeup artist, apparently a fucking fantastic one.
Absolutely.
And the constable isn't really a constable. He's her uncle. The only one that was still really what he was the ferryman. She goes through, she explains everything that she did. She does apologize for some of the prop joke things in the bedroom. She didn't realize that they were going to be so problematic and painful for some people. Nan is still kind of sitting over by herself a little bit, kind of looking frumpy and frowny, like she's not overly thrilled. But everybody else seemed to be having a good time. Even eventually Rob and Kit start laughing and joking about it, because she brings in all this champagne, they pop open the bottles, they start drinking and partying and doing some crazy shit with the heads and all that stuff. Then, at some point, Muffy, I guess, decides she's going to go to bed. So she goes up to her room, obviously drunk, still carrying a bottle of champagne, drinking on that bottle. She walks in, opens her door. She sees the rope hanging. She pulls it down, throws it on the floor. And on her bed, you see this square package. It's wrapped like a present. And of course, I knew instantly what it was because she made such a big deal of it in the beginning. But she unwraps it. It's a Jack-in-the-Box. So she goes and she's winding this Jack-in-the-Box and winding this Jack-in-the-Box. This one doesn't take nearly as long as the other one, but she's winding it, and then right as it's about to pop, she stopped. And then she's like, what the hell? And she goes ahead and winds it. And when she winds it and it pops out, all of a sudden from behind her, you see Nan, who is now like slicked back hair. She's looking real cool.
She's looking badass.
Yeah, she is. She's looking really good. She comes up behind her, grabs the top of her head, pulls her head back, takes a knife and cuts across her throat. So then she immediately grabs at her throat, and Nan starts laughing, and she shows her the knife, and it's a fake prop knife. It has like a little bladder on it to squirt out blood. So she kisses her on her cheek and says, April Fool's Day.
They both kind of laugh it off.
Yeah, they laugh it off. And then it cuts to the Jack-in-the-Box, and it's a cute little Jack-in-the-Box. It's not that creepy monster. It's a little like almost Asian clown jester kind of look, and it winks its eye, which I thought was an interesting, like, why'd they bother doing that? So that was the end of the movie, and it ended like that. Tell me your thoughts on the movie and what you felt about it.
So I was quite surprised to see how well acted it was, because whenever people talk about 80s horror movies, there's always that cheese factor to them that kind of makes them campy and just kind of overbloated. For the most part, I thought that everybody did an incredible job bringing their characters to light, especially when they're going through their horror stuff.
Right.
Like the screaming and the terrifying sort of stuff. I mean, yeah, we can joke around about their reactions to things or the lack of reaction to things, but like when it comes down to it, like everybody I thought did a really good job with their characters. I mean, don't get me wrong, there was some campy dialogue and there was some campiness to it. For the most part, for the type of movie it was, I thought they did a great job with that. One thing that wasn't discussed when we were talking about that first night when they went up to their bedrooms, they open up Chaz and Nan's door, the obligatory sex scene. I have to admit, as a kid, that really kind of creeped me out, because I'm like, is that what sex is? Because
wrapped up.
They were just like wrapped up and coated in, and I wouldn't even say a pretzel. I don't know what the hell they were in. But I'm like, what the hell is that?
Because I was trying to figure out, okay, whose legs are where right now? And
right.
then finally, I was like, okay, her legs are up in the air and his got one leg up near her shoulder. It was like, what the heck is that contortion? But
right.
yeah.
And the way they're positioned, it's like, is it in?
Yeah. They were pumping away, like they were moving in that kind of movement, but maybe your belly button is there and that like maybe a little higher. How long is it? I don't know what it was like a weird position, like how is it there? Yeah.
Right. It was totally unrealistic.
Yeah.
It really was. But I thought the movie had some very funny parts to it, and it had its horror aspects. I did like it because it wasn't overly gory.
Right.
It did kind of play off into, like, because like when you go back to the movie after watching it and you see the feet and everything, like you don't actually see the characters dying off.
Right. Yeah.
Except for Buck. He's the only one that you really kind of saw that potentially could have been killed off.
Right. And Hal, you do see him,
right,
but you don't see him. That's not bloody. Like, there's nothing bloody about his scene, but all the other ones that were bloody, you don't see. Especially Nan.
Right.
Nan was mysterious.
And honestly, the bloodiest part of the movie was the end scene when she does the fake knife across the throat.
Right, yeah.
That was like the bloodiest part of the movie. And even then, they played it off as a prank right from the start. So, yeah. But I liked it. I mean, it was good to go back to it.
Right, yeah. For me, of course, again, I had said earlier that this was a favorite of mine when I was a kid, and I watched it several times. And that's why it blows my mind I don't remember any of this movie, because I watched it many times as a child. But of course, again, like 40 years ago. When it first started, I was scared, not because of the content of the movie, but because the first scene was very fuzzy because it was through the view, and I didn't realize it, of Chaz's camera, where he was interviewing Nikki, and I was like, oh my God, I hope this movie's quality isn't this bad the whole time. I was like, this is awful. And then finally I realized, and I was actually surprised at the quality of the film, that it wasn't overly grainy or gritty like I was kind of expecting it to be. I was also expecting, and even though there were some mishaps in filming, obviously, like the part where the snake I was talking about, and there's some other parts, like there's the part where if you watch when Rob goes swimming and then goes in the boathouse, his hair, I can't remember when he was in the boathouse or when he was coming out of the boathouse, but his hair completely dry, fully coiffed. Perfect. Amazing. But there were like little things here and there, but I was actually surprised because I've gone back and watched older movies that I thought were amazing when I was a kid, like Clash of the Titans. I thought that movie was amazing when I was a kid, and I was so excited to have my kids watch it. And I was like, this is like you could, like, there's that part where the bird comes in and you can see the string holding the bird as it's flying in. And I was like, this is horrible.
And the claymation.
Yeah, right. So I was kind of expecting it to be bad, like, because of course, we've gotten to a point in our lives where everything's so overly produced that when you see something from back in the day, it's a little disappointing. You feel like, to some degree, I mean, there is the nostalgia to it that I still love, to that style or that, time frame in that era. But yeah, I liked it. But the reason I loved this movie so much when I was a kid is because I loved the surprise at the ending, because the ending was a surprise for me at the time. I loved how they twisted it so that it was just all an April Fool's joke, and I didn't catch on to it. So, but they did have an alternate ending for this movie.
Yes, they did. Yeah.
Yeah, and it says Jeff Roven's novelization features the notorious ending in which Skip sneaks back onto the island after everyone has left to kill Muffy for her share of the family money, though he fails and winds up dead himself. This ending has never been released, but stills of it have surfaced. I found this on like a fandom page or something like that. It also says a revised draft of the script included another version of the above mentioned ending in which Skip sneaks back onto the island to slay Muffy. He springs out of a closet and slits her throat, and she at first panics but realizes it is all a joke when she sees her friends standing around. The script then states that Skip stays on the island to help Muffy with the bed and breakfast. So that was those were two different alternate endings, I guess. Nice. It does say that the film's comedic twist ending irked some fans of the slasher genre, and it's considered the catalyst for the downfall of the subgenre's popularity in the 80s. Which I'm like, wow, really? It had that much impact? I was like, okay.
Right.
I didn't really realize it had that much pull, but I guess so. It said it
I
didn't
mean-
go over well with fans when it originally ran.
Yeah, 'cause I don't remember like any of the marketing or any of that kind of stuff. I just remember my father had the movie one time and we watched it. So like I had no idea that it had any kind of impact like that.
I didn't know. Well, it wasn't a movie that I even knew came out in the theaters. I mean, at that time, I don't think I was really paying a whole lot of attention too much to theater movies. I was more into like your VHS and stuff. So I didn't even know about it until it was in VHS form anyway. But yeah, I honestly never hear anybody talk about this movie. So I didn't know if it was, like I read that thing where I found that it had a cult following, which I didn't know it did. I've never really heard anybody talk about it.
Yeah, neither do me. I think you're really the only other person that I know that's actually really talked about it.
Yeah, nobody ever knows about it when I mention it. But yeah, I liked it. It's a fun 80s movie. It has the attempts at horror in it, but it also has that little bit of comedy in there.
And I do think it's more of a comedy than a horror, though.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I would like to play a little homage to someone in particular before we sign off. Poor Clara. We wish we could have known you.
Need any help down there? No, Clara, thanks. Some last minute straightening up down here. God, I think I worked so hard in my life.
You sure you don't want me to stay? There's going to be nobody around here to help till the first ferry back Monday, you know.
No, Clara, you're a peach. This one's mine. I told my father I'd do it, and I will my way. We don't want him to have any excuses.
Have a nice party.
Nice? He's got to be better than nice. He's got to be bloody unforgettable.
Good luck.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to quickly explain how our podcast is set up since we forgot to mention it at the start. When we decided to do 2 Cents We See Scary Movies, we thought it'd be fun to structure it with monthly themes. Every month has a different theme, and we take turns picking the theme. For our very first episode, I got to choose, since we're kicking off the podcast on April 1st, that naturally I thought, what better movie to start with than April Fool's Day? And since April Fool's Day is all about pranks, I decided the theme for this month would be horror movies based on pranks. So for next week, we're covering June 9th, which you can watch for free on Tubi. If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and check out June 9th. You can join us in our critique next week. So, you survived this episode of the 2 Cents We See Scary Movies podcast. Thanks for listening, and remember, be scared.
Be prepared.
And don't get caught in the dark.